now that we've had a basic control flow intro, let's move to the next topic, which is going to be when statements and expressions. So when statements and expressions are very, very similar to this if, else if, and else setup, and I'm just going to show you what one will look like with the same context here. So the when statement or expression is actually testing the value of a single variable. So rather than performing multiple tests within one block, we're actually just going to perform the one test and write what's called a case for each of the possible values that it could take on. For example, something like isDoorOpen can only have one of two possible values, so we only need two cases, but a string can have essentially infinite values. So what we'll do is we'll provide a few cases, and then we'll have a default or an else case, which is kind of like the else with an if statement. So allow me to show you what I mean. We'll first take a look at the simple example with the isDoorOpen. So we'll kind of simulate this scenario using a when statement. So we could say something like when isDoorOpen, or that's door locked, we want isDoorOpen, okay? And then we set it up kind of like before, so we give all of the possible values. In this case, the only values are true and false that it could take on. And then we do an arrow, so a dash and then a greater than symbol, and then what we want to have happen if this is the case. So in our case, we might want to change action equal to the door is open, so enter, and otherwise we want to change the action to leave. Okay, so this is doing exactly the same thing as this, just slightly different syntax. So one of the big differences with when statements and if statements is the fact that when statements are exhaustive. So that means we have to provide a possible scenario or a possible case for every single possible answer. So isDoorOpen is a Boolean variable, can only take on one of two values, but like I said, a string can take on pretty much any value we want it to. So we would have to write an else case for this, okay, in which case we can pretty much, again, just do this and then have some code here. In our case, and it's going to say that this is redundant because there are, again, only one of two possible values. Otherwise, very, very similar to this. Again, note that we're testing the value of a single variable and then again giving all of the possible cases for that. So I can do pretty much the same thing with this by shortening this, getting rid of the action equals, and turning this into an expression. So I could say, again, action is equal to when this, and then rather than setting action equal to this, all I need to do is take that out, and we're just going to get rid of that else clause there. Okay, and again, this is doing exactly the same thing as above. Alright, so it's important to note that we can turn when statements into expressions, but I'd like to leave it in the original format, just so that it's easier to read when you go to review your notes. So that is actually it. That's all I wanted to cover as far as when statements and expressions go. Like I said, really similar to if, else, and else, or if, else, if, and else statements. If you can understand the setup, then the when statements are very easy to understand as well. Just keep in mind they do have to be exhaustive, so you always need an else clause, whereas with the if and else if and else statement, you actually don't need an else at all. Okay, so with that being said, we can now finish this up. We'll move on to the next section, which will be covering loops. We'll first cover a while loop, and then we'll take a look at for in or for each loops.